It's 7 o'clock. Just waiting for Evan to join. But why don't we just kind of go through the normal procedures here for a fully remote meeting? Just to let everyone know, it's 7 p.m. Welcome to the Grafton Select Board meeting for February 8th, 2022. It's 7 p.m. I call the meeting to order. Just to remind everyone here tonight that this meeting is being done remotely in accordance with state law. I just want to confirm those in attendance, please respond in the affirmative when I read your name, please. Mr. Fazio will not be joining us tonight, so Mr. Mead.
Me too.
Mr. Often?
I am here.
Ms. Roy?
Right here.
And Peter Carlson is here. I'm expecting Evan to be joining us here in a moment, but also with us is William Blake. Can you respond in the affirmative? Okay.
Yep.
And is Evan having some difficulty, or is he?
Yes, he is signing on, but it's just going to take
a second.
Yep.
Okay, understand. Just real quick, I think a couple of announcements. For those of you who haven't read already, the Board of Health voted last night to lift the indoor mask mandate for Grafton, Massachusetts to expire on February 18th. So in 10 days from now, they will no longer be requiring public places to mandate masks. And that they encourage, safe and social distancing still, and utilize some common sense in large open areas with multiple people. I don't have any other announcements at this point. Do we have any public comments from the public? If so, you can use the Zoom function. All right, not seeing anything. So we've got a short agenda tonight. Just to remind the board, I know we had tentatively scheduled the Affordable Housing Trust to meet with us tonight, but we had moved that to the following Tuesday, just due to scheduling conflicts and just some procedural things. So we will be adding them to the agenda. But first up tonight, if we don't have any select board or town administrator reports. No. Okay, so first up tonight is we're going to talk about the Capitol Road and Stabilization procedure. So I will give this over to Evan to give us an update.
Yep. Excuse me. 1 second. I'm having just a slight technical issue here.
Evan, would you like it on the screen?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Well, I'm having a problem over here.
Yep, I got it. Okay. Can everybody see this?
We see just a blank screen right now, William.
All right, let's try that again.
Perfect.
Anything now?
We could see that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great.
That's good.
All right. Thanks, Will. So as I'm sure you all recall, we had this on your last agenda. This is the Capital and Road Stabilization Fund procedure. And this is a procedure that is supposed to give you the steps necessary to review whether or not you need to add any funds, meaning 2.5% to either of your overrides. And also to remind the board that it's necessary every year to write a letter, regardless of whether you're raising or not, to the Board of Assessors to ask them to raise the overrides on the recap. Because if you don't do that, they go away. So, without a mandate from the taxpayers, it seems unlikely that the board would ever vote to raise less than what the override was originally authorized for at town meeting. So that, you're doing what the taxpayers signed on for. If you're ever going to reduce that number, I would think you'd want to garner some public feedback on that. So what we did here is, the purpose kind of remains the same, which is just, we're trying to keep everything stable, and also ensure that we keep pace with environmental and market conditions, right? And that's what we're talking about here, because over time, your buying power will go less far. So what I had done here is I just broke it into two steps. So at the first meeting, you'll vote to direct the Board of Assessors via written letter to raise the funds, to authorize a town meeting for capital stabilization road funds. And it'll be no less than the amount raised in the prior fiscal year. So again, if at any point you vote to add the 2.5% or a 1.5% or whatever you vote to do, that now becomes the floor, right? That you're gonna grow from there. And so the second part is then the select board shall discuss whether to raise up to 2.5% additional funds is allowed by statute. If you deem that growth is necessary, the board shall instruct the assessors to increase the funds of the capital stabilization road account by the desired amount not to exceed 2.5%. So in talking to our financial advisor, what we don't want to be doing is writing a letter that says, we want you to raise 800,000 plus 2.5%. You want it to say the final amount that you're asking them to raise on the recap. It needs to be in that monetary value. And that really was the only other stipulation given to us by our financial advisor. I think that covers it. It's fairly straightforward. Again, it's just a procedure to outline those steps.
Any questions from the board? Colleen? And then Ray.
So I like this much better than the other one. Thank you. And the only two things that kind of jumped out at me is in step 1 where it says at the first meeting. Should we say at the first select board meeting, just to mean we're being extremely specific, so just not confused with town meeting or anything like that. And then at the bottom where you're talking about the dollar amount, should there be like a example using numbers so it's just very crystal clear?
So perhaps, and I'm willing to change anything. I did write out like this amount shall be written as a whole number and combined with the previous year's requested amount to try to clarify that. We could certainly write, maybe we would do that on a separate page, like as seen in this example or something like that,
Okay. Just because
Yeah.
I know we're trying to be super clear for future boards, so there's no questions, and to me, that just helps, I think.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I don't know.
Ray?
Yeah, one question. Was this done in previous years?
Yeah.
Heading
So
2.5%?
no. So since the override on 2019 is when the vote was, I think, and first time raised for 2020, fiscal 20, I think, is if my memory serves me. But at any rate, it's always been just the 800 and the 1.5. And the letter has been, straightforward to that effect. You do have the option to do that. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody understands that either way, you have to do the letter. Whether or not you exercise your option is part 2. But the option does exist.
So based on the economy and how prices have gone up since we started this program in 2020, how many fewer roads have we done because of inflation?
I don't know, but I'm sure it's considerable since, bituminous is up, I think, 30% from where it was
Yes,
when you passed this.
It is.
So yeah, the money's definitely shrinking. Your buying
So
power.
is 2.5%, which is equal to what, $32,000,
Right.
somewhere around there. Is it even worth it to, what are we going to get for $32,000? I guess.
Matt, did you want to address that, or did you have another question?
No, I just wanted to address that a little bit. So this roads program started back in 2014, or I guess it would have started 2015 after that override passed. Um,
Okay.
had we been consistently upping the number by 2.5% at that point, we'd have around an additional 300,000 a year. So that's where, each year isn't a huge amount of tax burden. It's not a huge amount of additional revenue that's raised, but what it does is it just allows you, when you run into these spikes in cost of living increases with materials and workmanship and all that, it allows you to absorb a little bit more of that and maintain your roads, which obviously we're building more roads on a yearly basis. So this isn't a sort of fix for everything, and it's not something that we would look to, I think, um, to do 1 year. It's just basically you're keeping up with inflation over time. So, as we know, 2.5% for most of the services in town is barely keeping up with the cost of living and cost increases. This is just another one.
I may add, I think one thing this policy does is this calls for the board to take some official action, whether it wants to raise it or not, and puts it on the record. I think this is a very important component that's been missing since 2014 when we created the road stabilization account. I like the fact that the board shall write in a letter to the assessors one decision or another, regardless, right? So it's on record from the board. They had this discussion every single year. And to everyone's point, there may be a year where future boards may decide not to do it, but it would be great to know why they didn't decide to do it. You know what I mean? So I think, and the Colleen's changes, substantive, I agree. I would like to see calling out that first select board meeting. I would agree that could be ambiguous. Like, does that mean town meeting? Because it just happens to fall in October, right? And there was one other change that you proposed about writing the formula out, or some number. Um, I'm not sure what was the consensus on that one or what the rest of the board feels, but what Evan, could you just remind me again how you address that?
Yeah, so I suggested, we provide a sample attached to this policy.
Okay.
It actually, and this is just me thinking out loud, but it actually might, on some of these policies that call the board to do some action, it might behoove us in your policy manual to have an appendix that has sample policies, because a lot of times we're trying to find a policy that the board did something 5 years ago, and it would be great to have that letter to know
Mhm.
what that looked like. So maybe that's a way to do this. Is this would be our first one doing that, but you know, see sample letter and appendix, and
So the appendix could show a schedule, for example, if we did this in year zero, year one, year two, year three, here's how that compounding factor works.
yep, you could certainly do that. Absolutely. We could definitely, I mean, on the website, it would be, you could either attach it to the document or do it as an, like have an appendix section, I would think, Will. Yeah.
Okay. I like that idea too. All right. So this obviously would move into something as a standing agenda item for that October meeting, right? So this will be something that just has to be brought forth. So what's the reminder mechanism, I guess, so once we implement this? Like, how do you envision that the board won't forget about it? Is this something that the assessor will remind us on as part of their daily, day-to-day procedures?
This should be part of, and I believe it already is, the finance director's schedule
Okay.
of financial timeline. So
Okay.
she keeps a financial timeline already. And trust me, she was very vocal about it needing to be done this year. So I know that they've already incorporated that into their timeline. And I honestly think that's the appropriate place to house it.
Mhm.
So the finance director would, prompt the town administrator every year. Don't forget, you got to do this first meeting in October, and away we go. We don't really have a board schedule, although, maybe that's not a bad idea as well. Things that you need to do annually. Unless I've missed it. Maybe it exists and I never saw it. But that might be another way to do it if the board's interested in that. Creating some kind of a calendar that shows, the common things that you do at certain times.
All right. I think that's a good idea to consider at a future meeting, like what that would look like and what are the things that we may want to include for board meetings going forward, maybe putting it into our policy or handbook that we discussed back in the fall. I think that's a great place to put that. So someone has a place to go where that's always located and that's a living, breathing document. As things evolve, dates may change, but that's where I would like to go. That's where I would probably go first when I was looking for some information. And then I would call you, Evan.
Yep.
So,
And then I would call Mary to look at the calendar that was created.
and then we would all call Colleen because I'm sure
There you
she
go.
has it
That's
already.
right. Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this? No? All right. So we'll bring this next week for a vote to the board.
Yeah,
Changes.
we'll make those changes and we'll create some kind of a sample
Okay.
for the new appendix. That's what we're going to go.
Great. Okay. All right. If there's anything else, we can move on. All right. Next up, we have projected housing growth. So before we get into this, Evan, I saw some correspondence earlier from a ZBA member to the board about adding some additional data here. Is that something that were you aware of that you saw?
Yeah, I did. Mr. McGoldrick and I had a brief conversation about it,
Okay.
where he's capturing data. And so this was, this is our first pass at creating this kind of tracking sheet that we can then, use as primer for conversation. So, we didn't catch everything that the ZBA is doing. I think we missed two of things that they would know. One is what Mr. McCusker had told us, and two was one that Chris was aware of that we got through Katrina. So we will update that list. They really don't make a substantive difference they should be on the list, but as far as what we're talking about now, it doesn't, I think, change the narrative, so to speak.
All right. I just want to make sure we capture that before we go.
Yeah,
any further.
and we will. We'll make sure
Okay.
that it's there.
All right. Go ahead. Take it away.
All right. Will, do you want to share that part of the packet?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you. I have like 40 budget tabs open and I can't find anything that I keep open. So,
Can everybody see this?
yes, sir. So, we were anticipating, or we started having a conversation about the Affordable Housing Trust coming in, which led to subsequent other conversations when I'm meeting with members of the board for, weekly or biweekly check-ins, and we're all having conversations about housing. So what I had asked Chris to do is put together a preliminary list of what we think, or what's kind of in the works for housing that will be coming online somewhere in the next, say, 2 to 3 years, as a ballpark. And so that's why we have this category over here. And I'm moving my mouse, but it's on Will's screen, so you can't see any of that. I'll stop doing that. It's on the planning board status. No matter how many times I try to scroll this, it's just not working. So the planning board status, we have, approved, pending applications, conceptual. So even if we've just heard about it or had an initial conversation, we wanted to put that up here. So in the next 2 to 3 years, you're looking at, and this is just the developments that we know about, over 1,000 new units coming online. And really the reason for us just wanting to bring this to your attention is that there are opportunities in other communities that are doing different things around housing development. I know Colleen had come across something that maybe with regard to Hopkinton, but also, knowing what's going on out there, I think can help us frame the conversation as we look at the budget, new growth. What are we looking at as far as potential build outs? What does that do to the public infrastructure? What does this do to the entire narrative around what we're doing here in Grafton, when in 3 years you'll have over 1,000 new residences online, with potentially 2 to 4,000 new people living in Grafton, which has an impact on the school system, the police, the fire, all that stuff. So, I think it's important to at least have this on our radar. Um, but also to think about, and I don't want to put words in Colleen's mouth, but she had sent me an interesting article about Hopkinton and their HCA and some of the money they're generating on new growth, to offset some of those costs to infrastructure, which I think was interesting, and maybe something that we want to put on for, review, or maybe at the same time the Affordable Housing Trust is here, or maybe not. But that was really the impetus for this conversation.
All right. Anyone want to start? Any questions or comments? Colleen?
Well, I'll chime in and talk a little bit more about the HCA. So 12 years ago, Hopkinton had a developer come in and they were building about 1,400 homes. And it was a combination of apartments, multifamily, single family homes. And because it was a one developer, they negotiated an HCA. And over the last 12 years, they've had to pay impact fees to help offset the cost when there were more children in the school system, public safety, things of that nature. So I got a copy of their original HCA and the number of amendments they've made over the years. And the number is close to what this is. When you add those other two projects, we're over 1,200 homes could potentially be showing up in Grafton over the next couple of years. And that's very similar to what the growth Hopkinton saw, only it's not one developer. So if we could look at what they did with that HCA and maybe determine a certain density of a project, anything over, say, 200 homes, and we negotiate a smaller type HCA, or something of that nature is what I was thinking about trying to figure out.
Is there a sample of that HCA you can send through Evan to the board, Colleen?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I would be interested in reading that. Anyone else have any questions or comments on this? Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an interesting one. Back in the 80s, 90s, there was a lot of build outs that were done, fire station, schools, police station and whatnot. And that's all good capacity build out for future growth. I've read lots of articles though that towns can definitely put themselves in a bit of a bind by not trying to figure out ways to take new growth money and put it towards things that are not just operational expenses. And I think that's something that should definitely be examined. And again, it's a difficult thing because it's one-time money, and we're talking about operational expenses to support additional population with most of the services that we're talking about. So I welcome this conversation. I think it's a really interesting view on what's happening. And I think the HCA is an interesting idea. I'm not sure. It seems like the horse is out of the barn a little bit with a lot of these developments, and we are dealing with lots of developers, but definitely a great idea to explore for sure. I guess the thing that kind of struck me a little bit when I looked at this is, are there any other trends that are interesting or meaningful that we could look at? Like, when we look at all these developments, how many additional single family homes are we adding? How many rental units are we adding? In particular, I'd be interested in, how is our affordable housing coming along, that, the percentage of SHI and all that. So I think, this is a great starting place, but as a tracker, it'd be interesting to see just a little bit of additional data in terms of what the trends are, housing overall in Grafton, because we do that, the housing production report very, very infrequently to support the housing trust. To have data that's sort of interim data that we can look at, what's happening And the trends would definitely be valuable, I think, to both the board, planning board, affordable housing, all the stakeholders involved that'd be interested in this.
All right, any other questions from the board? So our meeting with affordable housing next Tuesday. So just let me ask the board, is this something that we want to cover with them as one of our objectives while we have a meeting with them and go over this data? Colleen?
When you say one of the, are you talking about the HCA?
That could be one of them. Like I said, I didn't have any specifics in mind. I kind of left that open-ended question, but it could be. I just wanted to get some direction to the chair, make sure that he watches this part of our meeting tonight and they can be prepared. I believe they've got a. Did you guys already have a meeting in February, Matt, or is it this Thursday?
No, it's Thursday.
So this might be something good to kind of give them a heads up and they can add to their discussion. And by next week, we've seen, look at this data, we've reviewed it, we've asked some of our questions, and we can jointly discuss it and its impacts. But it could be the HCA calling is what I'm saying. I wasn't trying to say just that, but was there anything else? And do you think that that's relevant for affordable housing? I guess let me ask you that question.
Well, I was going to say, I think it might be premature to discuss the HCA with them. I think we should really have a handle on it first, but at least, notify them of it, I guess. But I wanted to know I was just trying to qualify what you were looking for. For me, I'm interested to talk about how we can support them and what they would like to see from the select board to help them achieve their goals.
Yeah, that's part of the agenda. Absolutely. Okay. All right. That's fair. All right. So I guess the other question I have on this is, do we have a document about what these impacts are to Grafton from? I know the schools do they do a comprehensive student analysis. They also look at all these new developments and what this means, and they use a formula. Excuse me, to look at trends. I mean, all of these divisions that I'm looking here, and let's say, half of them are, let's say there's kids that come into the school system that's 500, minimum, right? If you look at one per household here per unit, I'm just curious. The school department has that updated. I haven't looked at one in several years, but I'm just looking at impacts that are going to come down the road, Evan.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of our conversation. From my experience here in Grafton, that it's a little preliminary or I haven't seen anything or had that level of discussion. So really, this was kind of the primer to be like, all right, we need to start thinking about this a little bit harder as we're doing the things that we do, making the decisions we make. I know that the school department definitely is looking at that from a different angle, and I think that we need to do a better job of that on our end.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Matt?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to comment. I believe that they did the school population study in 2019, or I think it was 2019. So it was relatively recent. They didn't see at that in that year significant growth that was going to concern the schools at that point. But obviously things have changed quite a bit since then. And I think that's also, looking at the type of housing that's going in will be relevant to that conversation as well.
All right. Okay. So Evan, moving forward, like what you're envisioning on utilizing this information?
So I think that this is something that we are going to, I think, use for a lot of different things, but also really ingrain into our budget process. Our budget process, our preliminary budget process, we start talking about things in November, looking at this and saying, okay, here's where we're headed. What is that going to do to the services that you're proposing?
Gotcha. Okay.
That's kind of my 35,000 foot view of it. I think it's got, we do a lot of these things lately and keep them in shared areas so that when you're doing, work that this data is relevant for, you can go and mine that data. Um, so that's as far as I got, to be honest with you.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's a good start. No, this is good. All right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Oh, thank you for putting together the data. I know Chris is, I put him in here in the meeting. I don't know if Chris, if you had any comments before we move on with this.
Thank you. No, I think it was covered pretty well. Yeah, so just the ZBA units, there was 140 units that would be added onto this through the ZBA process. Primarily looking at this new growth, so I did a little additional work, and we're over the past 5 years we've added on average 39 units from our building permits. That doesn't necessarily take out some of the potential demolished units or things like that. The primary growth here to look at, the two big drivers, you have the 8 Pine Street, which is 317 units, and then one of the conceptual plans of 14 Snow Road, which is another 300 units. Those would be rental units. We've seen a lot of increase in obviously the rental capacity, and single family has stayed pretty steady, but we've seen increased growth in that. So not all of these are guaranteed to come online in the next year or 2 years, but it's something that's in the pipeline, something that's in the works, whether it's been approved or pending application. So
Okay. Thank you. All right. No other questions from the board? Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. All right. Moving on. So the other point we want to discuss tonight was MBTA regulation.
Yes. Chris, are you still there?
I am.
You want to maybe jump on and talk MBTA? This is definitely your wheelhouse over mine. I know you've had your hands on this for quite a while.
Yeah, so the MBTA communities, primarily what that is the legislation was enacted. This is part of the economic development bill that came through, and they're developing the final legislation and guidance for this MBTA communities, which was attached to the economic development bill. We're currently in the initial guidelines were issued, and we're in a kind of a public comment phase where the state is holding a lot of information sessions and engaging with municipalities and the public to get some of their feedback on those initial guidelines before they finalize them this summer. So that comment period, I don't remember the exact date, but it's near the end of March is when that comment period ends. So we have until then to submit comments back to them. We did some initial looks at what those criteria that they listed out. I think there's a number of options. We're still a little bit preliminary. I don't want to go over those yet, but that's something that we're kind of looking at, is how would those criteria fit Grafton's context, looking specifically at the 50 acres around the MBTA train station. The density at 15 units per acre is fairly dense. That's you're looking at the 8 Pine Street style development, high density housing next to the train station. I think preliminarily, one of the concerns that we're going to want to look at as Grafton in that area is around the train station is our a lot of our commercial and industrial parcels, and how do we accommodate housing in the way that satisfies the 50 acres, but doesn't endanger our ability to build commercial industrial as well, and fits with those uses, for a diversity of tax base. So I think that's primarily what we're going to be looking at. What are those options? What does that look like? to preserve those commercial parcels and also, meet those criteria. So there'll be more coming on that, but I think that's kind of the initial start of it. So in March, I think we'll probably be having more discussions, but that's the first look. So.
Okay. Any questions for Chris? Colleen?
Yeah, I have two questions. So 8 Pine, will that count towards this goal at all, or does it have to be new project?
So that's a great question, and that's one of the things that I'll be looking to kind of clarify. So looking at the initial criteria, the North Grafton Transit Village, that zoning does meet the criteria, other than the 50 acres. So one option would be extending that North Grafton Transit Village overlay and encompassing additional acreage where that does need to be contiguous. So where that gets placed or expanded into that's part of what we would kind of look at as an option. And then the other kind of, I forget the exact name, but it's there's a housing capacity number that was listed. And that's going to be something that we're going to be looking for clarification on what that number, quantifies and how do we meet that capacity number. There's hasn't been as much guidance, or we still need to wrap our heads around what those requirements will be for communities. And certainly we would want developments like 8 Pine to be counted towards that. I think ours was listed at 1,100 units. So we certainly would want a project like 8 Pine that meets the criteria to be counted towards that. But that would be an additional kind of ask. And if that number, as communities grow, is that something that we need to keep up with, similar to the SHI of percentages, or does it stay where it's at? So.
Matt?
So, Chris, I don't actually think, so Colleen and I both went to the MMA seminar on this. The guidance might have been updated, but I don't think it has to be contiguous. That was a pretty key point that a lot of communities brought up. So we may want to relook at that, but regardless, this zoning by right with that kind of density, it's not likely, I think, with what we have in that area within a half mile of the train station to actually produce the amount of housing density that even if you zoned everything in that half mile radius, we probably still wouldn't end up with that kind of density. So, I think the work is going to be trying to do the best that we can to preserve that. There's only a few commercial areas in town that we can develop for that commercial tax base to preserve as much of that, and also allow for as much density in housing as possible. That's all defensible to the state, because they were talking about, towns losing funding and whatnot, and potentially other fines that are unspecified at this point. So I'm not being alarmist in any sense of the word, but I think the work is to really try to thread the needle a little bit with trying to figure out, how can we expand maybe that village mixed, or do other zoning techniques to get us as much housing density as possible, and also preserving those commercial properties, and that, that revenue opportunity for the town. So anyways, I asked Evan to put something on to talk about this. I think, we're very likely to see some zoning changes over the next couple of town meetings. And I thought it was important to just get some eyes on this. It's a little bit preliminary, but before the end of the year, we've got to file at least a sort of back of the envelope type of plan with the state with some type of planning. So I know the planning board's going to be pretty busy this year, just trying to figure out how to thread that needle.
Any other questions or comments? Colleen?
So I know, Chris, you said they're in the public comment phase. Besides clarification on 8 Pine, are there any other Grafton specific questions that you're thinking about submitting?
I think those are the major ones right now. We're certainly, I think, going to put together some additional meetings, put this on the planning board agenda at some point, probably zoning board of appeals and affordable housing trust, just to kind of get some feedback from them as well. But we obviously want to kind of dig into the guidance a little deeper and get more educated on ourselves to kind of help guide that process from a local level. So I think the ones that we kind of discussed tonight really focus on the major ones that we're looking at. I expect that there probably will be more as we kind of think that process out and think out the impacts of that kind of density to Grafton in this area. So.
A question on timelines, like when do you expect us to have to come back and revisit this, and just something that we can put tentatively on the calendar between Chris and Evan? What do you think?
I think probably one of the first meetings in March would be good to come back to it, and that will give us another meeting. Throughout March we can kind of finalize comments and add anything that the select board comes up with. While we move through some of the other boards as well. And then that meeting that was discussed, so the select board, the process for the summer, I forget again the date, it was included in the memo that I submitted. We'll just have to have a hearing with the select board and fill out a form on their website, which is essentially saying that the select board is aware of the requirements and is moving towards zoning that whatever the final guidance is.
Okay. And generally comments submitted by other boards and committees, those are prepared in advance and the board submits that as one comment, or do individual board members have opportunities to submit their own personal comments? Like can you walk me through that process just so we can be prepared?
Yeah, so you certainly could submit comments on your own, whether it's the board directly to the state. What I'd like to try and do is, as we move through this, is to kind of collect comments. Anything that's sent to me, I'll certainly include, and pretty much kind of collect all of the comments that we can receive and thoughts that we can receive, and then send those as one big document to kind of be included. As more of a comprehensive look, but certainly if members wanted to submit their comments directly, that's encouraged as well.
Sounds good. All right, Matt.
Yeah, just one last one. Chris, they made a point of mentioning that there's local technical assistance available to help municipalities plan. So I hope you guys are taking advantage of that.
Chris, did you respond to that? Were you going to be taking advantage
Oh,
of that?
so it may not have picked up. Yes, I was aware of the local technical assistance, and we'll review.
Okay.
That for sure.
All right, great. Well, does anyone else have any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing anything. All right, so stay tuned. So we'll get through March. And we'll hear from you and Evan on what to schedule next on what we need to do. And that hearing time frame, we're looking at some point in the summer, right, that we have to hold?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we'll put that on the calendar tentatively somewhere so that we don't let that creep up on us too soon, because summer's kind of around the corner in terms of municipal government. So
It is. That's like tomorrow.
I know. Right. All right. If anyone doesn't have any other questions or comments, I can say thank you, Chris, for coming in, for presenting this. Be interesting to see how this turns out.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. I don't have anything else tonight. It was really kind of a short agenda, but I want to thank everyone for coming out. We'll see everyone. We've been invited tomorrow to attend the public hearing with the Finance Committee for the budget presentation. So I hope to see you guys tomorrow evening. If not, please be sure to catch the presentation on playback for those who cannot attend. And we'll be having that on our future agenda item, just budget discussion and follow-up for next Tuesday. So we're going to have a pretty packed agenda next week, so just prepare for a long, enduring one. We're going to have a joint meeting with affordable housing, and we also have to consider the Snow Road development, which is also going to be tentatively on the agenda for next Tuesday. So just so you guys are all prepared, if anything comes up, please let me know for tomorrow so we can get the packet out by Friday. And I want to thank everyone for coming out. At this point, there isn't anything else. We don't have minutes tonight. We have no reason to go into executive session. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Second. Motion made a second. All those by roll call, please. We're going to go with Mr. Mead,
Mead eye.
Mr. Often,
Off tonight.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, aye.
Carlson, I. Declare the motion carried. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you
Night
tomorrow.
all.
Bye.